The morning the Varek came back, I was 300 meters up the east face of the iron spine, running a stress survey on the new lattice panels. The sky was the color of old iron, the way it gets before the seasonal rains, and the city spread below me in every direction, for as far as the eye could follow. Kilometer after kilometer of interlocked arcology tiers, transit spines, vertical forests, and the long gleaming backs of the defense hangars sunk flush into the rock so you wouldn't know they were there, unless you'd helped put them in. I had 41 years in structural engineering on the Iron Spine project. I knew every load-bearing rib in that mountain of steel and stone, and I knew what lived beneath it. The alert came through my helmet as a single amber pulse. Not red, amber. The perimeter watch designation for an unscheduled transit arrival. I set down my survey rod and looked north. They came through in a column. 7 ships, then 12. Then, the count climbed past 30 before my visor stopped numbering them and simply said, Fleet. The lead vessel was enormous. A wedge of dark alloy the size of a small city, bristling with weapon emplacements that caught the morning light. Design. Archaic even. By the look of the drive configurations, you could read 20,000 years of frozen doctrine in the way they held. Formation. Tight. Ceremonial. Built for a display of dominance over a world that had nothing in the sky to answer them. They would have run their initial scan the moment they cleared transit. I know what that scan returned. I've seen the data. We all have. 240 orbital platforms, fully armed, most of them running silent until a threat trigger lit them up. A debris exclusion grid that was, in the Varek's own engineering vocabulary, structurally indistinguishable from a planetary shield array. And on the surface, arcologies on every continent, each one a layered fortress that had been built to code around a core of things that were very definitely not civilian infrastructure. The scan must have taken them several minutes to process. I imagine the bridge of that lead ship going quiet as the numbers came in. They hailed us on a frequency we had been monitoring for 11,000 years. The translation came through my helmet speaker in the flat voice of the automated relay. Our linguists had cracked the Varek signal dialect for millennia ago from the founding marker they'd left buried in the bedrock of what is now the central continent. We had been listening to their broadcasts at the edge of our detection range for the last 900 years. Updating the models, there was no lag, no fumbling. When the Varek commander spoke, we answered in his own language before the echo of his transmission had finished. He identified his force as the 6th Reclamation Vanguard of the Varek Ascendancy. He stated that Earth, he used the old colonial designation, Seed World Keth Oran, was being formally reintegrated into the Ascendancy under the Founding Rights Compact. He expected, I think, silence, dead, or primitive world. At most, confused radio noise and the weak lights of a species that had barely learned to chip stone. He got Planetary Defense Liaison Officer Sarah Thun. She was 29 years old, and she had rehearsed this conversation, in one form or another, since her first day of training. We all had. Everyone who worked on the Iron Spine, everyone who had ever read the founding marker's text. Thun's voice was level. She acknowledged the Varek commander's transmission. She informed him that Seed World Keth Oran was no longer an applicable designation under any extant legal framework, that the entity known as the Varek Ascendancy had failed to maintain contact, oversight, any form of administrative presence for a period, in excess of 19,800 years, and that the Founding Rights Compact, she quoted the relevant provision in the original Varek legal dialect, perfectly, had a lapse of claim clause that triggered, at the 500-year mark of uncontested, independent habitation. She then noted that humanity had been independently inhabiting this world for roughly 40 times that threshold. There was a silence from the Varek fleet that lasted almost 8 minutes. I spent those 8 minutes watching the orbital platform network light up, one ring at a time on my visor's tactical overlay. Not dramatically, no sudden blaze of weapon locks, just a quiet, methodical sequence, the way you'd run a pre-flight check on a piece of machinery you'd been maintaining for centuries. Because that's what it was. The platforms had been maintained. The crews had been rotated in and out for generations. The targeting algorithms had been updated every decade against the best intelligence our long-range monitoring could collect on Varek military doctrine. Every platform commander had trained against simulated Varek fleet configurations. When those platforms came online, they did not come online angry. They came online the way a master craftsman picks up a familiar tool, without hurry, without drama, without any doubt about how it works. 37 platforms locked solution on the lead Varek vessel before the commander answered. He said that he disputed the legal interpretation. Thun told him that he was welcome to submit a formal counterclaim through the Intersector, Tracian registry which humanity had been a signatory to for 6,000 years. She provided the filing address. She also noted, without emphasis, that any hostile action taken against Earth or its orbital infrastructure would be treated as an act of war, and that the planet's defense posture was, she used a word I remember clearly, even now, sufficient. He could see the platforms. He could see their count and their alignment and the weapon signatures his own sensors would be reading off them. He knew, on some level, what the word sufficient meant when spoken from behind 240 combat platforms by a species that had spent 20,000 years preparing for exactly this conversation. The Varek fleet went to a holding position at the outer edge of the orbital envelope and stayed there for 11 hours. I finished my stress survey. I ate lunch on the gantry. I watched the city below me, the morning traffic flows on the transit spines, the construction drones threading between the upper arcology tiers, the ordinary noise of 9 million people living their ordinary lives in the shadow of a machine we had built precisely so they could keep doing that. My father had worked on the iron spine before me, his father before him. There was a framed photograph in my office of my grandfather standing on the raw bedrock of what would eventually become sublevel 43, the deep infrastructure tier where the real hardware lives. He was smiling. He knew what he was building. He never saw it finished, but he knew. That is what grief beneath pride feels like. You stand on the finished thing, and you think of everyone who built it and never saw this day. Everyone came to work in the morning, generation after generation, maintaining something they hoped would never be needed. They are why it worked. Because we were clever. Because we were patient. Because we remembered what was buried in our bedrock and we decided without drama, we were never going to be caught unprepared. The Varek commander sent a final transmission at hour 11. He stated that his fleet was withdrawing pending legal review. He did not say when they would return. He did not say they would not. Thun logged the contact, tagged it for the arbitration registry filing, and went back to her duty station. I took down my survey rod, packed my kit, and rode the service lift back to the gantry office. There was still 3 hours of work left in the day. The lattice panels weren't going to survey themselves. We built this world to last. We built it knowing they might come back. When they did, it was ready, and so were we. That is the only thing worth saying about it.